Flannery, and I'm an attorney at the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law. I will be moderating the webinar today. Today's webinar is sponsored by the following organizations: the Shriver Center, the Asset Coalition Toolkit, Illinois Asset Building Group, AARP Virginia, Center for Economic and Policy Research, the Economic Opportunity Institute, the New America Foundation, the Retirement Security Project, and the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy. We thank all of our co-sponsors for supporting the webinar today. Before we begin the webinar, a few housekeeping matters. If you are experiencing technical difficulties at any time during this webinar, please contact Hannah Weinberger-Divac at 312-368-1104. All attendees will be automatically muted. However, attendees will be able to ask questions using the control panel. We will forward questions to the presenter as we receive them, and the presenter may choose to answer questions during or at the close of their presentation. We would like this webinar to be interactive, and all the presenters welcome your questions. And with that, let me introduce to you our panelists today. First, we will have Dean Baker, who is co-director for the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Madge Bush is the Director of Advocacy for AARP Virginia. Gary Burris is the Senior Policy Associate for the Economic Opportunity Institute. Olivia Calderon is the California Legislator Director for the Asset Building Program at the New America Foundation. Gary Burris is the Senior Policy Associate at the Economic Opportunity Institute. And lastly, David John is a Principal at the Retirement Security Project. Before the panelists begin their presentation, I would like to speak briefly on the topic of asset building and asset poverty. Asset building aims for households to acquire financial resources to get ahead in life, not just get by. To explain asset building, it helps to define it in the negative, asset poverty. Most people have heard of income poverty, which focuses on a household's current income level. Asset poverty, on the other hand, focuses on a family's total household wealth. A household is considered asset poor if it does not have enough assets to meet its expenses for 3 months if all outside sources of income disappeared. Assets include home equity, stocks and bonds, pension, and retirement accounts. More than 1 of every 5 U.S. households and approximately 1 in 4 women-headed households are asset poor. And asset inequality is even more pronounced by race. 37% of non-white households are asset poor in the U.S. Building toward asset ownership ensures that there are adequate financial resources to weather a financial crisis, build economic stability, and shield a household from poverty. To be financially secure in retirement, individuals cannot simply rely on Social Security. Social Security is not and was never intended to be the sole support for retirement income. Instead, it must be supplemented by individual savings. Unfortunately, as the asset poverty data shows, and Dean Baker and Madge Bush will discuss, nearly half of all workers are not offered a retirement savings program through their employers, and most Americans do not have savings or assets that will allow them to be financially secure in their retirement. UVRAs are a potential solution to this problem, and Ted Bettner, Olivia Calderon, and Gary Burris will discuss various attempts at establishing UVR programs in their states. Finally, David John will discuss proposed federal legislation that would implement a UVRA program. As the current economic climate has demonstrated, assets are essential to a family's well-being and retirement. And with that said, we will begin our presentation. Our first presenter is Dean Baker. Dean is co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. He is the author of Plunder and Blunder, The Rise and Fall of the Bubble Economy, the United States since 1980, The Conservative Nanny State, How the Wealthy Use the Government to Stay Rich and Get Richer, Social Security, The Phony Crisis, and the Benefits of Full Employment. He appears frequently on TV and radio programs including CNN, CBS News, PBS NewsHour, and National Public Radio. His blog, Beat the Press, features commentary on economic reporting. He received his BA from Swarthmore College and his PhD in economics from the University of Michigan.
Matt? Okay, Matt. Hello?
One moment, Dean.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for having me on. Thanks for the introduction. Okay, let me run through this very quickly because I've been getting warnings from my computer that's going to shut off in a few minutes, which hopefully will not be true, but I don't know that for sure. Can I get to the first slide? Not seeing any slides.
There we go. One moment.
Okay. Okay. Try to. There we go. Okay. No. Okay, great. Okay, first slide is just showing the decline in the share of private sector workers who have defined benefit pensions. These are traditional pensions that, if we go back a few decades, were fairly common. This is someone typically get a percentage of their final earnings or an average of, say, the last 5 years of earnings. It was never the case that most workers had them, but if you go back 3 decades, we see over 40%, a bit less than 50% of all workers had this. And think of more secure, often blue-collar jobs, steel workers, auto workers, workers in manufacturing. Certainly union workers tended to have them, government workers. But that's dwindled rapidly. The data we have here is for 2008. When we get the data for 2009, it's almost certainly to show a further decline. Even the 20% number, I should point out, for 2008 is likely overstating the people who currently have a pension that's being contributed to by their employer, because very often workers don't necessarily know whether their employer is currently contributing to defined benefit pensions. But the takeaway from this is that if we go back 3 decades, workers could, or at least many workers could, recount on a somewhat decent retirement supplement from a defined benefit pension. That has largely disappeared, and again, that number is going to fall rapidly. It'll fall in 2009. It will certainly fall in the years ahead because the few employers that are still offering defined benefit pension plans are dwindling rapidly. They're freezing them or just ending them. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so this is just showing what the baselines look like going forward, what you get from Social Security, which is the main source of retirement income for more than, close to 2/3, I should say, of people over age 65. And as you can see, this is in 2009 dollars, so we see that the baseline benefit is projected to increase slightly. So if we look out 10 years or 9 years, I guess I should say, we're looking at a baseline benefit that's about $900, about 6% higher than it is today. But I put alongside this the Medicare premium, and you'll notice that the Medicare premium, what people pay to buy into Medicare, is projected to increase by about $400 over that period. It eats up most of the increase in Social Security benefits. If we carried this further out, say if we carried it to 2028, 2038, what you'd find is that the projected increase in the Medicare premium actually eats up all the increase in the benefit. So the story we would be telling going forward is that people over time will actually be getting smaller benefits in Social Security. So the economy will be getting richer. We expect, or at least hope, that workers will have higher wages, but we will be expecting retirees to actually have less money to live on after we deduct their Medicare premium from their Social Security. So long and short of that, if we don't have some supplement, some additional source of income other than Social Security, what this means is that people who are retired, people over age 65, will actually be living on less in future decades, even as the rest of society is getting wealthier. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, well, the question is, how are people doing in terms of accumulating wealth on their own? You know, as showing the decline in defined benefit pension plans, of course, that's been offset by or I should say partially offset at least, by the growth in defined contribution plans, the big growth in 401ks. Those first came into existence at the end of the 70s, and of course many people now have them. So the question is, how much have people actually been able to accumulate? And the answer is, I've shown here net wealth by income quintile. This is for the early baby boomers, people who are at the edge of retirement, or in many cases already retired, age 55 to 64. How much were they able to accumulate as of 2007, before we had the recent crash, and what do things look like for that group today? And I should mention that the fifth quintile here, you don't see a top because it would go off the charts here, but we're more focused on people towards the middle and bottom, obviously. That's the group that we're mostly going to be concerned about. The long and short of this is that even before the collapse of the housing bubble and the downturn in the stock market in the last year, year and a half, we see that the early baby boomers were not doing very well. They'd accumulated less than $200,000 in wealth. If we look at that third quintile, people right in the middle, they'd accumulated less than $200,000 in wealth. Let me point out what this is. I'm saying net wealth. This is everything. So this is everything that they have in 401ks, any other retirement account, mutual funds, what they have in a saving account in the bank, everything that they have by way of financial assets, and also the equity in their home. And sort of a useful measure, the median house price is about $175,000. So what this is in effect saying is that with the older baby boomers, if you go back to 2007, they would have had enough wealth to just about pay off the median house price. Now, since the collapse of the housing bubble and the downturn in the stock market in the last year and a half or so, we've seen that their wealth has fallen dramatically. The first quintile, as you see, goes to zero. It's actually negative, a small negative. The second quintile only has about $20,000 in wealth, and the third quintile is down to just about $100,000 in wealth. So they would be able to buy a little bit more than half of a home. So what that means is if they took all their money, used it towards paying down their mortgage, they'd still have almost half of their mortgage left to pay off, and literally zero. All they would have to get by on then is their Social Security. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. We do the next slide, please? Okay. Okay, so this is breaking it down a little more finely, just saying where do they have the money, and again, I'm just breaking out, on the one hand, the financial assets, their 401ks, savings accounts, other financial assets that they might hold, and then secondly, their housing equity. And you see that both fall sharply. The sharper fall, of course, is in housing equity. That's because we had this big fall in house prices, and because housing is typically a highly leveraged asset. Many people own a home, and they may only have 20 or 30% of the home paid off. If it's the case that the home falls in price by 30%, that completely destroys their equity, and that's certainly what happened in many, many cases. So what we see is that, just the breakdown that by quintile, that the first quintile has very, very little financial assets. They do have some housing equity, currently a little over $50,000. The second quintile has a little bit of financial assets. They have more housing equity. And the third quintile, the middle quintile, has somewhere on the order of about $130,000 in housing equity and maybe $40,000 in financial assets. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, this is just giving the same story. What does it look like for the late baby boomers, people 45 to 54, so they have a little bit more time to accumulate wealth, but again, these people are also close to retirement, and in many cases, of course, keep in mind, people don't necessarily make a decision to retire. They lose their job, they become disabled, so very often it's not a matter of choice when they retire. So these people have a few more years in the workforce, but typically not all that long. So they have some time to accumulate, but just not that much time. So again, same sort of story. If we look at the first quintile, we see they had almost nothing even before the crash. Now they're, again, in negative territory. The second quintile had somewhere around about $50,000 in wealth before the crash. We're down to around $20,000. Again, focusing on that third quintile, the group right in the middle, if you go before the crash, they had about $160,000 in wealth. We're down to about $110,000 in wealth after the crash. Okay, so again, comparing that to the median house price, if they took all their wealth as things stand now, they'd be able to buy a little bit more than half of the median house. So again, if they used all their money to put an equity in their home, they'd still have half their mortgage to pay off. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, the same sort of breakdown. What does it look like if we look at financial assets and housing equity? And again, we see that certainly for the bottom 4 quintiles, as was the case with the older baby boomers, most of their wealth is in housing equity, not in financial assets. Again, the first quintile, nothing to speak of either before or after the collapse in terms of financial assets, a little bit of housing equity. Second quintile has, after the collapse, about $50,000 in housing equity. The third quintile, the people right in the middle, after the collapse, have a bit over $100,000 in housing equity and about $40,000 in financial assets. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, to conclude, what we can see from this is that under the current system, most workers are going to have seriously inadequate retirement incomes. Basically, people will have some money in their home, very little money outside of their home. That's going to be true for the vast majority of retirees. That, you know, when you look at having 20, 30, 40,000 in assets over a 20-year lifetime, maybe that could increase your income 2,000 or so. That's nice. That's not going to make anyone very well off. Basically, you're talking about a situation where people are going to be dependent on their Social Security income. The other point is that as we're in a situation where workers are dependent on defined contribution accounts, they're dependent on their housing equity, those are very volatile, and that should be very clear with the stock market. I think people certainly do know now. They always should have known that the stock market's very volatile. That, again, was driven home very much by a sharp fall in 2008. But just as a general proposition, if we're dependent on our stock market for retirement wealth, that means that there's a lot of uncertainty. You could be retiring at a time when the market's good, in which case, of course, you're very, very lucky. But you may also be retiring at a time when it's down, in which case you'll face serious problems and have, you know, much lower income in retirement. The other point, the lesson that the last year should have taught us, is that even housing wealth can be very volatile. It had often been believed, many people, including many economists, tended to believe that housing wealth was very reliable, that you can count on house prices to be very stable. That's often true, but that's not always true, and we see that very dramatically in the last couple of years with a very sharp plunge in house prices. House prices nationwide have fallen about 30% since their peaks in 2006. And in many areas, they've fallen by much more than that. So you certainly have areas, Las Vegas, Nevada, Phoenix, Arizona, many other places around the country where house prices have fallen by 50%, in some cases even more. So the point, the takeaway at least I would have from this is both that we're looking at a situation where future generations of retirees, certainly those people immediately approaching retirement, but even younger people in the workforce, are facing a prospect of a very uncertain retirement, that the one area that they could depend on is Social Security, which is great. It's a very, very important support, but it's not a situation that most people want to be in where Social Security is their sole support in retirement. So I think this makes a very strong argument for the need to have alternative mechanisms that will be a supplement to Social Security. So I'll stop with that and let this continue.
Thank you so much, Dean. Up next is Madge Bush. Madge Bush is the Director of Advocacy at AARP Virginia. For the past 7 years, Madge Morgan Bush has served as State Advocacy Director for AARP Virginia. In this role, Madge has led the AARP Advocacy Volunteer Team to win major legislation in areas of consumer protection, economic security, senior mobility, older worker reform, and long-term care and health care reform. Staying in touch with the needs of the aging community, Madge chairs the No Wrong Door Advisory Board for Senior Connections, the Cultural Change Task Force for the Department of Medical Assistance Services, and presently she is serving on a task force to create a 4-year strategic plan for the Department of Aging. Madge has chaired the Virginia Council on the Status of Women for the past 3 years. She is a BS from the University of Georgia, an MS from Virginia Tech, and an MBA from Everett University. Madge?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm so pleased to be here this afternoon to present to you the status of retirement today. I wanted to first slide up this afternoon is to, our first slide up is to talk about how we really are looking at savings. And we're looking at the retirement issues. First, as we used to talk about this, was the savings in a concept of a three-legged stool. One was savings, another was pension, and the third was Social Security. Today,
I'm sorry, Madge. A brief interruption. Could you please hit Show My Screen on your computer?
yes. Did that work?
One moment. I apologize for the delay. One moment.
Did I maybe I didn't hit the right thing. Do I need to do it again?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, I did that. Do I hit Microsoft Word, Office PowerPoint? Does that help?
Madge, we're going to bring your presentation up and run it for you.
All right, it's fine.
You'll just have to notify us when.
All right. I'm just going to put mine down at the bottom. Excuse me.
Okay, we've got yours up now.
Oh, you do? I'm just running through mine so I can get it. Is it up on the screen? Okay.
Go ahead, Madge.
All right. Today I wanted to talk about what retirees are experiencing in terms of what we have to think of in our retirement portfolio. We have savings, pensions, which are either defined benefits or defined contribution, and Social Security, and work. One of the startling pieces of data that we know today, about 50% of retirees over 65 years of age depend on Social Security as their single source of retirement income. May I have the next slide, please, which would be the 4 pillars of economic security. Are we there?
Yes.
Okay. When we think about the 4 pillars of economic security today, and what our discussion today is on pension and individual savings, but now we really need to add one more part of our pillar, and that is, and that's really in the news today, that would be the adequate and affordable health insurance. So Social Security, pensions and savings, continued earnings, adequate and affordable health insurance. May I have the next slide, please? And I'm going to move through these rather quickly because Dean really covered the issues in this area. Retirement plans in the United States, we're looking at retirement today as primarily a voluntary employer-based retirement savings system. It provides coverage today for about 50% of the workers, and that has been stagnant for workers getting participation and access to an opportunity to save for their retirement over the past 20 to 30 years. The next slide is a slide about pensions, the retirement plan access and coverage. As Dean pointed out, the access, about 60% of all workers have access to retirement plans, but 62 million or 50% of workers have some form of private pension coverage. And today, the most startling thing that we are seeing is 44% of workers employed in firms under 100 employees have access to retirement plans. In our next slide, percentage of private sector workers with access to retirement plans, we're seeing that the trend is moving more toward defined contribution access and the trend for retirement plans. The really big concern that we have is that small business employers with workers of 1 to 99 workers, 41% of these workers have access to some form of retirement plans. And the defined benefit plans, as Dean pointed out in his information, it's dropping significantly. In Virginia, we have a large stakeholder group that's working on our state-assisted savings plan that I will explain in a few moments. But in our next slide, we are seeing, and this comes from Dr. Ron Wilcox from the University of Virginia, the Darden School. He has written a book, Whatever Happened to Thrift. Americans are saving too little. And the savings rate of Americans, while it has bumped up most recently, when we've had the economic crisis in the past, it's still too low. According to Dr. Wilcox, why we should care about the savings rate, a lot of people will find themselves very poor in retirement. If we don't fund the government deficit, someone else has to, as we are seeing that we're borrowing significantly from China, and our dependence on foreign investments will affect our own foreign policy decisions in the United States. In our next slide, individual savings in the United States. In 2002, 142 million Americans were eligible to make IRA contributions. Only 15 million taxpayers did so. It's very serious. The data shows that why these persons have done this is lack of knowledge and information about what's available, lack of long-term planning, and just plain inertia. In our next slide, the retirement boom. We are seeing the boomer population. Every second another baby boomer turns 50. By 2011, the first of the 78 million person generation will be turning 65. As Dean had pointed out, the boomers have not saved. Some data points that we have, not including the assets in a home, just savings rates that we found for the boomers has been somewhere under $44,000, not enough to really consider a good retirement savings for them to begin, which is why we're seeing a lot of boomers are planning to continue work as long as possible. The scarce retirement resources, in our next slide, not enough of us have the resources to retire. 75 million workers have, about half of the workplace have no retirement plan at work at all. The national savings rate is the lowest since the Great Depression, and Americans are retiring with not much to live on other than Social Security. What can we do about it? What ARP is doing is we're focusing on three big efforts, and this is in my next slide. We're creating an opportunity where every worker will have an opportunity to have savings in the workplace. We're trying to make savings easier for employers to participate, and we are improving the understanding and helping to educate consumers about the importance of savings. In the next slide, the opportunity that ARP is concentrating on now are two initiatives. The automatic IRA, which is a federal effort for ARP. We are about to introduce this legislation in Congress, which would give employers a simple, low-cost way to help employees build a nest egg. In our states, and I'll talk to you about our own program in Virginia, the state-assisted savings, this is where the state would serve as a facilitator to provide employees with employers to provide for their employees a simple way to save. In our next slide, the auto IRA, employees with more than 10 employees in a business for at least 2 years would have an opportunity to offer their employees an automatic enrollment. We know that consumers really save better and employees save better if they have the payroll deduction, and this would provide the employees the opportunity to have their paycheck and retirement funds automatically deducted. They would choose, the workers could choose not to participate, but the employees would have a tax credit to start up with the administrative costs. We think auto IRAs would be good for employers, and it's good for employees to start savings plans. The next plan that ARP is really working on is a state-assisted savings. In this way, the state would assume no legal liability for the plan's performance, but we would build on an experience that states have in running retirement plans or running these kinds of programs. There would be the economies of scale to help with the fee structure and then provide a clear way for the private sector accounts and provide these accounts for the employees. As Dr. Ron Wilcox has said, the single biggest public policy that we can take in our time is to increase these savings. And we're working with our Virginia state policymakers to find a way to increase these, making savings easier. Our program in Virginia in the next slide is called VERA, Virginia Employee Retirement Accounts, and that is just one solution that we're proposing. In VERA, it's a payroll deduction plan where the state government would take on the role of facilitator. We're using the 529 model of the college savings plan as our model in Virginia with a state facilitated, but it would become a more of its own entity, very similarly modeled where the state loaned the college savings plan monies to begin the program, and then that was paid back to the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that program has been very successful in Virginia. Our stakeholder group, this is the study that we're working on to find the model that employees in our Commonwealth would have an opportunity to save at a smaller rate. One of the problems we're seeing is that employees are not able to save in the market of under 100 employees. We've really targeted the 1 to 50 employees for the small business employees, and we're expecting that these employees will want to save somewhere around $10 to $20 a week. It's certainly a smaller amount than what we can do in the very large IRAs or 2,500 or 5,000 IRA. We're trying to help give the employees that are working for very small businesses the opportunity to save through payroll deduction. As we look at the whole thing, ARP encourages everybody to get engaged in the savings rate, to inform and educate consumers about this issue. In Virginia, we are going to introduce legislation in the 2010 General Assembly to have a Virginia Savings Month, to do an all-out campaign to educate our whole constituency about the need to save, what the benefits of savings, to try to move this inertia into action and engage our public policymakers in finding solutions. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madge. We first have 2 questions for Dean and Madge. The first question is, longer working lives help contribute to financial security. How can UVRAs help people transition to encore or second careers?
Dean, do you want to go first? This is Madge. Would you restate the question, please?
One of the questions was that individuals are engaging in longer work throughout their lives, and that helps to contribute to their financial security. And so the question is, how can UVRAs help people transition into second careers? So in other words, currently people are having to work much longer into their what would usually be their retirement. And how would UVRAs help these people either not have to do that or transition into a second career that really focuses more on charity or giving back to the community in some ways? A lot of people are doing Peace Corps now, for example.
Well, I think that the UVRAs can be a benefit where people can have their funds in retirement, that they can go and give back, they can get engaged and enter that discovery phase that we at ARP call, what used to be the retirement phase, they can have that time in their life where they do good or give back to their communities. If they early on get involved in these savings programs, they will have the savings there to assist them. And I think as employees are working longer today, this, with people that may decide to stay in the labor force at 65, some may, another 10 years could add a significant amount of monies for their retirement when they do want to give back, and 75 is certainly a time that they could consider doing that.
Okay, thank you very much, Madge. We are going to now move on to our third presenter. Ted Bettner is founding executive director of the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy, a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy research institute dedicated to examining issues that matter to working families in West Virginia. Since the group started in January of 2008, the center has produced more than 55 reports and policy papers and has generated more than 175 media stories and commentaries that have begun to change the economic debate in West Virginia. Ted is the author of several reports on tax and budget issues, retirement security, and workforce development, including Closing the Retirement Gap. Voluntary Retirement Accounts offer solutions for small investors, and the 2009 State of Working West Virginia. Ted has a Master's of Arts in Political Science from the University of New Hampshire and a Bachelor of Science in Journalism from West Virginia University. Ted?
Great. Can you see the screen, everybody?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Kate, for having me on. Dean and Madge have outlined some of the problems that workers are facing with regard to retirement security, and they also outlined some of the mechanics of how a voluntary account system might function. What I'd like to do over this next 10 minutes is probe a bit closer and tell you what we've learned from our experience in West Virginia. I'm violating one of my laws of putting a lot of text into a PowerPoint, so forgive me. It's hard to get some of this stuff into nice graphs and charts and things. But first, I just want to start off with going over some of the history in West Virginia, how we started this. We started this in 2007 with our first bill, and Dean Baker actually participated in a conference call with legislators. He came down and testified to one of our committees. And in 2008, we passed a study resolution that created a working group among the Treasurer's Office, the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy, West Virginia ARP. And through that, we developed and created another piece of legislation in 2009. In 2009, it was passed out of one committee, the Senate Pensions Committee, but it died in the Senate Finance Committee. So that's sort of the brief history of what we've been able to accomplish in West Virginia. And in West Virginia, we call it voluntary employee retirement accounts, or affectionately known as VERA. And VERA, we call it VERA. This was just a pamphlet that we came up with to promote the program. Some of the major components of our bill is that only small businesses can participate, so 100 employees or less. This was used to sort of combat the argument that the bill would crowd out private investment, so we limited it to 100 employees or less. Our bill also allowed for the creation of a 401k option, something that we'll talk a little bit about later. The estimated cost was $3 million over 10 years, and it's expected to be paid back during that time. It was going to be paid by the state treasurer's unclaimed property fund, so that's an important thing to consider when you're figuring out how you're going to fund the startup costs to begin the program at a state level, is how it's going to be paid for. This is probably going to change this year, but this is the way it was last year. And the next slide shows the startup cost and participation. So we're really trying to go down and see exactly how the policy was enacted at our state, and some of the considerations that the committee members had, that legislators had, and the governor's office had. So this chart outlines exactly what we can expect in terms of participation, average account balance, and the fees associated with the startup costs, and how those are going to be reversed over time. And if you look there, you can tell that, from the program start, we were looking at an average account balance of about $6,000, which is probably pretty conservative when you get to year 10. But we're anticipating, when starting the program, we'd have about 100,000 people participating by year 10. And this would increase even further as we move further down the line. About half of the startup costs we anticipate to be reimbursed for those first 10 years. So it's important to recognize that when you're starting this program, it's going to be paid back through the annual administrative costs and charges on the account. So it's not something that you need the money. It's going to be paid back. So that's important to bear in mind when you're talking to legislators or you're getting the legislation intact. Well, one thing to go over, too, is when you're looking at the state level and how you're going to approach this, your strategy as an advocacy organization, you want to understand exactly what can go wrong and what can go right. So here's a list of things that I've felt are reasons why maybe it didn't pass in 2009. We have to remember, too, that last year was the first year we actually really had a good coalition and really pushed the legislation through. But during the end of the legislative session, the American Council of Life Insurers flew down from Washington, D.C., and basically created enough fog in order to kill the bill. And one of the things that they had a problem with, too, was the payroll deduction IRA versus the 401k. So that's a big issue for the private investment firms, that if you have a 401k, the ability to create a 401k within your legislation, it can be a red flag to a lot of the financial services sector industries. So those are some problems, too. You also want to look at the historic pension problems in your state. In West Virginia, many have seen that Pew report. West Virginia always ranks, over the last couple of years, last in terms of unfunded pension liability. And there can be a lot of confusion, too, among legislators and constituents whether this is going to add to that liability. We'll get to that a little bit later, but those are some more important things that have to be bear in mind. Also, there needs to be a lot of education about this at the state level. There's a lot of confusion about who's responsible for what. Is it a state liability? And are local or your small businesses really interested in this? Why aren't they at the Capitol talking about this if this is really going to benefit them? So these are things you need to consider and need to bring forth while you're advocating it. There's also some political factors, too. So I would say that go into advocating for a UVRA program at the state level. You might want to ask yourself how successful your state's college savings plan is. That was something we really had going for us in West Virginia. Our 529 college savings program is rated as one of the best in the country. It's very well managed. So that was a big plus for us. Also, their state's defined benefit plan. You want to ask if that's in good shape. And you also want to consider, Dean also talked about the economic volatility of the stock market, which we definitely saw in 2008, where many people, including myself, lost a lot of the money that they had in their 401ks. You also want to look at the members of the committees that you're trying to influence. If it's going to be brought for the pensions committee, there's a good chance that the people, the legislators in the pension committee, will work for the financial services sector, which is a good and bad thing. It's a really good thing because it helps you sharpen your arguments and define it further when you're before the committee, but it also can be seen as a threat to them. You might be looked at as sort of going after their business. But I think when you have a really good conversation with them, you understand that you're going after the part of the population that's currently not being served. Small businesses, small investors, generally speaking, aren't approached by the financial services industry because the accounts are just too small. There's not enough money in them. There's not enough money in it for them to make money on the account. So they generally don't even go after small investors. So that's something to really clarify. Let's see. Other political factors also, they might ask how many state employees participate in your deferred compensation program in your state. Another thing to consider, too, is if you're working with the treasurer's office, the ability of the treasurer or your equivalent there in your state is how good is he or she at persuading members of the legislature and the government to be able to get the bill passed, because having the treasurer's office on board is very important. Doing it without them would be almost impossible from our perspective. You also want to ask whether your coalition has enough clout to influence lawmakers, whether they can really get on the ground. ARP does a great job in our state of really getting out volunteers, talking to people. You also want to be able to detract the fact that many people ask you how many states are doing this, and right now there's no state that currently has this in place. So those are some things you just want to consider down the line. Some common misunderstandings. One big misunderstanding that we combated time and time again is whether the state was liable if participants lost money in the program. And from our understanding, states would not be liable for this unless there was gross negligence going on. Also, whether the program is voluntary or involuntary. Are you mandating that all small employers in your state have to participate in the program, or is it voluntary? In our state, it was voluntary, but if an employee desired it, the employer would have to open their payroll system for this. And I think that's a really important part. Also, one of the other confusing parts was who is going to be selling these plans. In our state, as most states, I believe, we're going to contract with a third party to do that. So the state's not going to be, the state treasurer's office is not going to be actually selling the plans. They will contract with a third-party vendor to do that. So it's very important you make that to them. This is something for the profit market. This isn't the state getting another liability on its hands. So that's important. Even though we didn't get anything passed, I thought some of the most effective talking points were that West Virginia's half the workforce lacks a job-based pension, and also that retirement assets is one of the leading causes of poverty among the elderly. I think that's really important to keep them on. And a lot of the more conservative legislators really understand the fact that if these people are retiring in poverty when they're retiring, that they'll have it can be a drain on state resources, so that can be attractive to some of the legislators you talk to. And also where you work should determine whether you can save for retirement. That was another one. Another one too that is really important is that small businesses face higher costs compared to big business. This is a big point when ACLI came down and we had a committee meeting. We brought this up, and they could not refute the fact that smaller businesses get hit with larger fees. They also get hit with larger annual fees on their accounts. So this is an example that's up on the screen now, that if a worker was contributing $1,000 annually for 35 years with an annual return of 38%, and we based it on whether the worker was in a state-administered program like the one that we're proposing, or a typical program like the one I have. Simple IRAs, 401ks charge you an annual fee as well. It's often called a basis point, so it's an annual percentage of your account balance they take to administer the account. Now, when you have a big entity like the government, they can pull these costs together and lower that fee tremendously. So in our program, we estimated an annual fee of basis points of 0.2%, and we looked at typical private sector plans that had an average of about 1.3. Right now I have a simple IRA from Oppenheimer, and mine's about 1.87%. So every year, 1.87% comes out of my account balance to administer that. So it doesn't sound like a very big difference, but over time we're talking a lot of money. So we're talking about a 21% difference. So a typical participant in the example below, about $66,000. Somebody, a typical small investor, getting an off-the-shelf IRA, looking more like around $55,000. So it is a big difference over time. So that's a really important talking point too. We also worked with a lot of coalitions, partnerships, and advocacy organizations. West Virginia ARP, Alliance for Sustainable Families, and the West Virginia State Asset Coalition. We also worked with the Women's Institute for Secure Retirement. And also one thing that we're participating too is in the West Virginia Elder Economic Security Initiative with wider opportunities for women. And we're releasing a report next year that will look at elder security, economic security for older adults in the state by county. And there are similar initiatives like this operating in about 12 states. And I would highly recommend that you partner with them on developing this type of program and bring them in the discussion. I think that's it for me, and here are some resources of the research that we've done on this. And I'll be happy to, if you want to email me or contact me, I'd be happy to answer any more questions.
Thank you so much, Ted. Next up is Olivia Calderon. She is the California Legislative Director of the Asset Building Program at the New America Foundation, a national public policy institute. In this role, she regularly testifies before the California State Legislature, founded the Capitol's first bipartisan educational forum for state legislators, and builds coalitions to advance key policies that make it easier for all Californians to build savings and assets. Olivia has drafted over 24 major pieces of legislation, 4 of which were signed into law, including bills to expand the rights of returning Iraqi war veterans, protect patients from cancer-causing X-rays, prevent sexual assaults on college campuses, and help working families permanently exit poverty. Olivia is a graduate of the University of California at Los Angeles. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you, Kate. Let me set this up. thanks so much to the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law for convening today's webinar on Universal Voluntary Retirement Accounts. Appreciate the introduction. Again, for those of you that are not familiar with the New America Foundation, we're a national nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank based in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C. And again, I'm the legislative director of the Asset Building Program in California, and we aim to help Americans permanently exit poverty and thus broaden the middle class by developing a range of proposals at the national, state, and local level that give working families access to the financial tools and incentives that they need to broaden their savings and their assets, which brings me to today's focus, retirement savings. And today I'm going to go over why we have focused resources here in California to advance UVRA that we call the Golden Dream Account that was reintroduced this session that's now Assembly Bill 125, the challenges and the opportunities with advancing this proposal at the state level, the lessons that we've learned along the way, and next steps here in California. So why promote retirement savings in California? We started doing research and we found that close to half of the private sector workforce go to work every day at a job that doesn't offer retirement savings at work. That's about 6 million Californians. And as we've heard earlier today from both Dean and Madge and Ted, about 40% of today's baby boomers are relying on Social Security benefits for more than 90% of their retirement income. And in California, the average Social Security check is a little over $1,000 a month, which is not enough to sustain Californians in their retirement. And in addition, Karen was reviewing asset poverty. We know that here in California, 25% of California households don't have enough savings to survive at the poverty level for 3 months if their income were to be interrupted. And for that reason, in conversations with Mark Avery, Dean Baker, David John, Michael Calabrese, Mark Paul coined the term Golden Dream Account for our UVRA proposal that's basically a voluntary portable retirement savings account for private sector workers that are not covered by retirement savings at work. And the whole purpose of this was to create an easy way for workers to save the way we all save best, which is through payroll deduction, and provide small businesses a low-cost, easy retirement plan to offer their employees, and structured it in a way that we would take advantage of existing state mechanisms, so use California's tax filing system and our public pension management program to expand retirement coverage in our state, all of which would be financed through account holder fees. In 2007-2008 legislative session, we introduced Assembly Bill 2940 that was reintroduced this session, the 2009-2010 session, that's now Assembly Bill 125, introduced by Assemblyman Kevin De Leon, that creates the California Employees Savings Program, which authorizes the California Public Employees Retirement System to develop and administer portable, individually owned IRA accounts for California workers that don't have access to these accounts at work. And it allows employers to match their employees' contributions through simple IRAs, which are mini 401ks. And the program is voluntary, except that very similar to West Virginia, and I believe also Washington State, if an employee wants to participate, then an employer's only obligation would be to transfer a worker's contributions through our state payroll tax system. Again, our program would also be financed entirely through fees collected from account holders, financed the way our college savings plan, our 529 scholarship program, was financed. This is how we envisioned it would be a general fund loan that would then be repaid back through account holder fees. In California, like in many other states, we've experienced some challenges that we are confident we'll overcome, but one of the main, of course, is our budget deficits. We envisioned financing this program through, again, a general fund loan, but there is no general fund to make the loan, and so we are right now exploring creative opportunities to acquire the startup monies that we need for our program through federal efforts, and I'll talk about those in a minute. The opposition that Ted alluded to from the securities industry is something we've also had to face here at the state level. The securities industry has been challenging for us to be able to gain the bipartisan support that we're able to gain through other initiatives because of a lot of the misnomers that are out there, and both of which impact the policy design. We have been thinking through conversations here in the state have been around how do we create a real cost-effective and efficient way to advance this proposal, one that would help ameliorate the opposition while also being sensitive to our budget. And so we are rethinking the design at the state level. And of course, there are so many competing interests at the state level that raising awareness is always a challenge, which is why these webinars and briefings are so important. The opportunities that we are experiencing now, of course, the national auto IRA that has been gaining significant momentum and that David John will speak to in a moment. We now see that the Obama administration is very supportive of this auto IRA to make it easier for workers to save, and also support small businesses throughout the country. Thinks that these national efforts will help us leverage what we're doing at the state level. There is significant bipartisan support for this idea nationally, and so we're hoping that that will help us gain the bipartisan momentum that we need here at the state to advance this proposal. And the small business community has been such an incredible partner in California. The small business community and AARP, long-standing relationships in the California legislature, and have been instrumental in helping us advance this proposal, as well as the media coverage that we've been able to attain. Which brings me to key lessons that we've learned here in California. It's so important to, as Ted was mentioning, do your homework, figure out how much it's going to cost, and what the benefits are in thinking through how you calibrate the account fees, how many folks would participate, which is why our state proposal would require that our public employees retirement system, before designing and implementing the program, go out and do a market feasibility survey and come back with a study reported to the legislature to kind of figure out exactly what the take-up would be of these accounts, to then have a better sense of how the fees would be calibrated and how much it would cost the state to administer or partner with the private provider to advance this account, and how long it would take for startup fees or startup costs to be paid back, again, through account holder fees. It's important to know what's up in other states, to share it with state legislators and statewide advocates, as well as generate broad-based support, particularly from the small business community that we know helped provide the political cover that we needed to successfully advance our proposal out of both policy committee hearings in both houses. The proposal is now sitting in the Senate Appropriations Committee waiting for the startup to be able to pass it out of appropriations. Also key to understand the power of media to publish articles and present on this topic to raise awareness, and highlight how the proposed policy in your given state is consistent with national and other state policy efforts. We were able to acquire significant small business support in California, as well as labor support, and kind of focused on these guiding principles. I'm not going to go over all of them, just highlight a few that resonate with both the small business community and the labor community. For small businesses, they are attracted to this proposal, see it as visionary, because it provides a low-cost, easy way to offer a retirement savings plan to their workers. One of the things we've learned is that small businesses would love to be able to offer something to their employees, but find it too expensive, complicated, and convoluted to do so. And so this state-facilitated IRA provides the ability for small businesses to help their employees secure their financial future. It eliminates the complexities, like I mentioned, and it also makes small businesses more competitive in recruiting and retaining their employees. And from a labor perspective, when we time and time again make it clear that with this IRA, the Golden Dream account does is provide a supplemental retirement savings product to help both public and private employees understand the importance of being more proactive about saving for retirement, and it targets those workers that are currently not marketed to. And we've had to be very clear that our state would not move forward with this proposal unless California secured all the necessary federal and regulatory approvals before designing and implementing the Golden Dream account. Staying true to these principles, we've been able to build a broad coalition and support, and I wanted to put this slide up. A lot of these organizations are active in your states, and they have been great partners in helping us advance this. AARP and the small business community have lobbied aggressively on this proposal and have helped us move this along. And media. Before introducing AB 2940 in 2007-2008, we reached out to various editorial boards, sent background packets, and we know that getting various editorial boards to support our efforts before unveiling our proposal is instrumental in, one, ensuring that we build a broad coalition and support, but also in helping to secure the governor's support in 2008. With that, what's next in California? We are seeking federal funding to start up AB 125. Again, we don't have money here at the state level, and that is the only impediment to making this happen in California, is starting up, finding the money to start up the program. We're continuing to educate Republican legislators, continuing to grow the state and national coalition in support of these voluntary retirement accounts, as well as focusing on very local chambers of commerce to hopefully get the support of the statewide chamber to neutralize the opposition from the securities industry, and are planning on regional briefings in the coming year to raise awareness, reach out to media, and ultimately deliver Assembly Bill 125 to the governor at the end of next session. With that, there are various resources out there. I invite you to check out our website as well as all the others on this slide for more background, and welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Our next presenter is Gary Burris. He is the Senior Policy Associate with the Economic Opportunity Institute in Seattle. His area of focus is retirement policy and Social Security. Prior to joining the staff of EOI, Gary was the Assistant Director for the Quality in the Washington State Department of Early Learning. He also worked for the Washington Department of Social and Health Services, Division of Child Care and Early Learning, and the Oregon Commission on Children and Families, the Evergreen State College's Center for Educational Improvement, and the Washington State Legislature. Gary has a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government and a BA from the Evergreen State College. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you. I want to just thank the Shriver Center for sponsoring today's conference call, and also wanted to just share with you a little bit about EOI. We're a Seattle-based nonprofit, and we do policy research and advocacy work. Most of it is in the state of Washington, but there are some policy issues we work on across the country with other states, this being one of those. And I want to thank both the Retirement Research Foundation and National AARP for funding us the last couple of years, which has allowed us to do this national work. The inception of this idea came from Dean Baker, and he worked with EOI and our director, John Burbank, starting about the year 2000. And we've been working on this, so for about 10 years we've been working on this issue. And during that time we've done a number of things. We've held meetings with stakeholder groups, we've carried out research and produced reports and fact sheets on voluntary retirement accounts. We've introduced legislation for several of those years, and I would just point out that the economy in our state was really pretty bad, and our state budget has not been good for most of those years that we've introduced the legislation. So we didn't introduce it in each year really thinking that it had a great shot of passing, but rather we introduced it to have a discussion with the legislators about this idea. It's just been the last couple of years that we've really pushed the idea. Of course, when we first started, that was when the economy was looking good before the most recent crisis. So I would just share with you that in 2009, even given our current fiscal situation, our bill was able to make it out of the Rules Committee in our state Senate. And although it wasn't brought up for full consideration by the Senate, we think we have a good shot of moving forward in 2010, and we will be reintroducing the bill. I'm going to share with you a few slides just to give you a little bit of background about why EOI decided to pursue this particular policy initiative. And some of these issues Madge and others touched upon, but the slides I have show it from a little bit different perspective. So let me just walk through these. The first one focuses on where the greatest need exists. And if you happen to work for a large corporation or the public sector, the retirement plans there are quite prevalent. It's not on this slide, but if you work for a company of 500 to 1,000 employees, the percentage offering a plan jumps to 60%, and it goes even higher for large companies and for the public sector. But the real issue is at the smaller size companies and small businesses, and that's where we see the biggest gap. Basically, the smaller the employer, the less chance there is that there's going to be a retirement plan where you work. Another issue I want to touch upon is the importance of retirement plans. And if you look at this slide, you'll notice that there's really a disconnect between what the employees think is crucial and what employers perceive as being crucial in terms of having a retirement plan at work. So employees identify retirement plans as crucial almost at 60%, where employers are in the middle 30%. And it may be that employees just don't have good ways to communicate their interest to their employers. Another slide that also deals with the effect of 401ks on retention, and it shows, again, the importance of having a retirement plan for workers. Employers thought that it would make very little difference in retention if they had a 401k. But there's a much higher percentage of employees who are ready to change jobs if they're offered a 401k. The next two slides look at what small employers say about why they don't offer a retirement plan and what would get them to consider offering a plan. These were done by the by EBRI, the Employee Benefit Research Institute, and they did several surveys of small businesses in the early part of the 2000s. So for several years they did surveys, but they haven't done these for the last several years. So while the data is a few years old, it's probably still pretty accurate, I would guess. So you'll notice on this slide that the first two reasons why employers don't offer retirement plans are financial reasons. And this makes sense. Small employers, small businesses operate on small profit margins often, and they don't want to take on something that they're afraid will end up costing them a lot of money. And you'll also note that most of the reasons are focused on the business, and they're not focused on the needs or the desires of the employees. And then again, you'll notice here, these are factors that would lead business to consider offering a plan. You'll notice that the top three reasons are around cost or profit. So small employers would be interested in doing this if it made them more money or it didn't cost them anything. But the area where I want you to focus here even more is the issues that are focused on the complexity of starting a plan and the fit for small businesses. If you look at reason number 4, having easy to understand information, reason number 5, reduced administrative requirements, and reason number 8, a plan customized to the needs of small businesses. Through our Washington Voluntary Retirement Accounts and through the other states that are putting plans in place, we really attempt to address some of these issues of complexity to make it a good fit for small businesses. So now I'll discuss the structure of the Washington Voluntary Retirement Accounts. We're looking at having a defined contribution plan with two parts to it, or 2 tiers to it. One would be an IRA for individual workers, and the second would be a simple IRA or some other type of small business plan. I think some of the other states were saying that they were looking at focusing on 50 or 100 employees, and we're in the same situation. We're looking at the simple IRA, which is for 100 employees or less, or some of the other plans in place that would be for small-sized employers. There would be a menu of options, and what's important for us is that there just be a small menu. One of the issues around complexity for workers is when there are hundreds of options in terms of the investment vehicle and dozens of folks offering plans, there's a lack of inertia. People just get stuck and they don't know where to start. So we want to keep it pretty simple for folks, have some basic options, but that there would be a range of investments, and that it would be administered by the state of Washington. So the advantages for the workers are payroll deduction, and one of the key issues here is that if you're able to sign people up when they first start in a job, or if they're automatically enrolled at that place of business, before they receive their first paycheck, it really is a lot easier for that worker. They never see that money in their hands, and it's taken out and put into retirement savings before they can really miss it. So we really like the idea of automatic enrollments and supporting these kinds of projects through automatic enrollment. We're also interested in portability between jobs. And a lot of the industries we would be looking at, for example, a lot of restaurants or other areas like child care workers, we're interested in trying to support workers in businesses that typically don't have retirement savings. And so what this would do is if you are in that field of work and you went from one restaurant to another restaurant or from one child care center to another child care center, you would be able to keep the same account number and you would just be able to continue investing. What happens right now in some cases where people, let's say they're in a business with a 401k and they move to another business, they maybe have a new plan that they can enter into, but it's not portable. So while we can't fix that problem, what we can do is look at those folks who are in industries where they typically don't have coverage and support them with a portable plan. And we're also looking at trying to have economies of scale. Basically, when you have a lot of small businesses and a lot of individuals pool their money together, and the state is administering this, so there's not a profit motive behind it for the state to operate it, you can have lower costs per account. And again, we would want to have just simple options available for folks. And the advantages to small business, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in just a moment, but basically that's easy to administer, that's low cost, and it allows firms to offer plans. Now, we've done several surveys and focus groups for small businesses. The most recent was in 2006, when we did a survey of small business owners. And all of the businesses were under 50 employees but one. And through these interviews, we found that 22 out of the 24 businesses supported the idea of voluntary retirement accounts. One of the businesses that didn't support the idea was just dead set against government having a role in this. And the other one said, you know, we really need health care before I'll even consider retirement accounts. But that person wasn't against the idea of having retirement accounts, just wanted to support health care first. Now, the Washington Business Owners Survey told us several things that are very similar to what we saw with that EBRE survey earlier, which was that businesses wanted to have diverse options. They wanted support for their employers and employees, such as a hotline or a website, basically making it easier for the employer and the employees. That if the promotion in the workplace wasn't solely the employer's responsibility, so if, for example, the state's running this program, can produce brochures and flyers, other kinds of things that might help to educate employees on what this is. And again, the idea of a portable account was important to them. And again, the businesses in Washington had some of the similar concerns that were in the Employee Benefit Research Institute EBRE survey. They wanted accounts that would reduce their administrative costs, that were easy to that had easy to understand information, that had optional company contributions, and was customized to needs of small business. And what we try to do in designing the Washington voluntary accounts were to meet those barriers that employers had. It doesn't make them a greater profit, you know, but it does try to reduce some of the other barriers that are there. As was mentioned by, at least by Ted, maybe by others, was the issue of the private investment industry and their concerns with the state government taking on some of this role. And you know, we've had the same opposition in our state, and we've really tried to educate folks because it's our firm belief that there's a market failure. And basically, what's happening is that the financial services industry isn't actively marketing products to individuals with small amounts of money to invest, and there's very little marketing of products to small businesses. And the reason for that is because there isn't much money to be made unless large fees are charged to a small investor or to a small business. It's really a loose proposition for the investment companies to take those accounts on. I mean, think about it. If you're putting in $25 a month and you're starting at zero, and you're only charging 0.5% or even 2% on that money, it won't be until you've gotten that account up to $5,000 or $10,000 that you start to make some money. A former vice president of Fidelity suggested that it might be close to $20,000 for Fidelity before they really start to make money on these individual accounts. And that's why you see states, that's why you see the financial services companies targeting 401k rollovers and those sorts of areas for their advertising, because they just don't make money with new investors who have very little to invest. And we realize that really there's a large percentage of the workforce that hasn't been investing for their retirement, and they're really not going to start investing unless something changes. So what we're trying to say is that if states do take this on, at least some of those states, in our state would be one of them, where we would contract with the private sector to invest the pooled dollars. So our state investment board would likely contract those dollars out. And that over time, once you start helping people to become investors who aren't right now, when they do have that $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 put away, they might start to either look for new investments and become, have a broader array of investments and start to shop for other products, or they might choose to roll over what they've accumulated for some other options out in the marketplace. As I said, what we're looking at doing is having just a bare bones set of options to get people started. And as people, perhaps as they progress in their savings, they might want a broader array of choices as they become more knowledgeable about what's available. And so that our accounts would be fully portable, and we would very much want people to use private sector options if that better met their needs. So our goal is really to get people started saving for retirement. Certainly they can keep the money in the Washington Voluntary accounts if that meets their needs, but also the money would be portable. You can move it over to private sector options if that better met their needs. And that's the end of my presentation. Again, thank you so much to the Shriver Center, and if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you so much, Gary. Before we move to our next presenter, David John, we have a few questions for the previous presenters. The first question is to Dean Baker. Dean, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. The question one of our attendees had for you is, what's the population estimate for the figures that you have cited in your presentation, and what's the percentage of this population in each quintile?
Okay, I should have made that clear, so thanks for asking that question. This is from data from the Federal Reserve Board. They do a survey of consumer finance every 3 years. And the units that they talk about are called families, and that simply means a household unit. So in some cases, a family could be a couple with multiple 2, 3, 4 kids. In other cases, it's a single individual. And I believe there's roughly 130 million family units represented by their survey. The actual survey is only around 7,000 or 8,000, but it in principle represents 130 million family units by that definition. And quintiles are a fifth of that. So each quintile should correspond to roughly 26 million family units. So that again would be the definition, family units. And in the lower quintiles, you're going to have, these are defined by wealth. You're more likely to have single households. As you get to higher quintiles, you're more likely to have couples. Again, these are older. The younger baby boomers likely still have children. Many will still have children at home, so you could have 1 or 2 kids in the household, maybe more. When you get to the older baby boomers, people 55 to 64, it's unlikely that you have children at home, although there certainly will be exceptions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dean. This question is for Madge. Madge, are you there?
I'm here.
How did AARP Virginia develop its 4 pillars of economic security?
Well, these 4 pillars actually came from ARP, and we actually looked at, from ARP's perspective, we looked at what it really requires today for economic security to to sustain an individual, and we are really seeing that you need not only the Social Security and pensions and savings, but we are seeing that those earnings that boomers and that many people are choosing to stay in the workforce to add that extra funding for their retirement or their economic security, and certainly the whole piece around affordable and accessible health care is really critical to the economic security today. So this came from our Public Policy Institute, from research from our national office.
Okay, thank you very much, Madge. This question is generally for Olivia, Gary, or Ted, and it is as follows. In a global economy where workers change jobs a lot and locations, how efficient is it to build retirement savings on a state level?
This is Olivia. I think this is the beauty of this Universal Voluntary Retirement Account. I mean, the idea, again, the way Ted and Gary mentioned, it's a portable and seamless retirement savings account, an IRA that you can take with you from job to job and continue to save into. Again, keep in mind, this is an individually owned account. The worker owns the account. At any point, the worker can take that IRA savings that they've accumulated over time and roll it over into any other retirement account and/or savings account. So again, keep in mind, it's individually owned and it's portable. And so any supplemental savings, we initially addressed the need for workers to build their savings, whether it be an emergency fund to help absorb, unexpected emergencies that pop up, and or small retirements over time. It supplements a pension. It supplements any other retirement savings that someone has accumulated over time. So I'd leave with that. I don't know if Gary or Ted, you'd like to add anything to what I just said.
Yeah, this is Gary. I think the one thing I would add is a lot of states, if you look at their 529 plans, they allow individuals in other states to invest in their 529 plans. And so it could well be, and it's going to depend on each individual state, but it could well be that a state would allow, let's say someone in Washington State started this plan and had their individual IRA with their individual account number, and they've worked here for a few years, and they moved to Oregon and work in a similar sort of business that doesn't have a retirement plan at their work site. As long as they can get, either they can get their employer to directly deposit the money into this account, as long as Washington State is saying, yes, we'll allow that investor to continue to invest in our program. So I think that's going to be on a state-by-state basis. But I think if the 529 plans are an indication, I think a lot of states would be willing to allow for folks who have been residents to continue to invest in other states.
Great, thank you so much. This now brings us to our last presenter, David John. David John is the principal to the Retirement Security Project and a senior research fellow with the Thomas A. Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation. He has been involved in Washington's top policy debates for almost 30 years, and he continues that career as Heritage's lead analyst on issues relating to pensions, financial institutions, asset building, and Social Security reform. John has written and lectured extensively on the importance of reforming the nation's retirement system. During this time, he has testified before a number of House and Senate committees on subjects ranging from Social Security and pension reform to improving the nation's flood insurance program. In 2001, he testified before the President's Commission to Strengthen Social Security, providing detailed analysis of how personal retirement accounts could be structured and regulated. John also testified before the House Budget Committee's Task Force on Social Security, explaining what the cost of transitioning to a system of Social Security personal retirement accounts might be as compared to the cost of running the current program. John earned a bachelor's degree in journalism, an MBA in finance, and a master's degree in economics from the University of Georgia in Athens. And before David begins, I should also point out that there is no PowerPoint presentation for his speech, so you will be looking at this screen through the duration of the speech. David?
Yes, thank you, and my apologies for sending you over a very old bio, I am also the managing director and principal at the Retirement Security Project, which is a joint venture of Georgetown University and the Brookings Institution, generously funded by Pew and Rockefeller. And we would like to thank AARP and ASPA and our funders for their support in developing this proposal. Mark Every, who has become respectable and gone to Treasury, and I used to be invited to a number of different conferences and congressional testimonies with the idea that we provide entertainment by disagreeing with each other on practically every word. And we disappointed a bunch of people because we discovered that we actually agreed on most things, at least in the area of retirement savings policy. And the two of us sat down and worked out a proposal called the automatic IRA using existing pieces of the retirement system. We use the regular IRA, we use automatic enrollment, and we use payroll deduction, which is something that the Clinton administration tried to set up, the payroll deduction IRA. Our goal was to provide retirement savings opportunity to small businesses and other businesses that didn't offer any other type of retirement savings, traditional pension plan, IRA simple, etc. Our goal was to make it as simple as possible for the employer and the employee. The proposal was, it's been introduced in Congress with bipartisan support in the last couple Congresses. We expect to have the legislation reintroduced sometime in January, assuming that the health care debate ends and our people can finally draft the legislation. The same people draft both. And it was endorsed by the McCain campaign and endorsed by the Obama campaign, and it is currently in the Obama administration's budget. So we've been working together for quite some time. Let me stress that what I'm mentioning here is the latest version. It's rumored that Congress and the administration will have some input into this as time goes on. So the final version may end up being slightly different, but we think we've got a proposal that works. What we do is to ask any employer who has more than 10 employees and has been in business for more than 2 years and who has no other type of retirement system at all to offer their workers payroll deduction IRAs. This is basically the same function that they already used in withholding their tax and their Social Security and other types of government payments. The employer would be asked to sign up with a provider, Social Security, or excuse me, an IRA provider. An IRA provider, by definition, is any financial institution. But in addition, we would have a government-sponsored web page, somewhat similar to Medicare Part D, where if you're a small business employer or a small businessman, you would sign up, you would go into this web page, put a little bit of information about your business, and you'd be connected to a page that lists all of the providers who are interested in providing you with auto IRAs. And we anticipate that there will be actually a fair number of them. One of the provider groups that we've talked to has told us that all a company needs to start with them is a telephone and a bank account, and they can handle everything over the phone or by over the computer in a matter of about 5 to 10 minutes to get this set up. Beyond that, there is none of the problems that you heard earlier in Washington State from Gary or from Olivia or Ted, in that our proposal uses, well, there are no plan qualification rules, no IRS approvals, there's no ERISA, no plan documents, no employer contributions. Because this is an IRA, the tax code says that only individual savings are acceptable and not employer contributions of any form. We believe that this is an important shift and an important feature partly because the IRA is very portable. It can be rolled into and out of 401k plans as the worker moves from employer to employer, but also because, frankly, it's politically feasible. It is something that we can deal with if the employer wants to put in money, and we would certainly encourage them to do that. We would like to see this done. We encourage them to move up into either an IRA simple or perhaps to a 401k if they're willing to make that step up. But basically that's it. The employer's responsibility is twofold. Number one is to select an IRA provider. And anyone who is on that list at the government-sponsored website would be acceptable for that. We would rather they didn't start at Joe's Bar and Pension Plan, but obviously a place that would be a respectable place or an appropriate place to house their worker contributions. And the second responsibility is precisely the same responsibility that they have right now, which is to forward those contributions on a regular and timely basis to that IRA provider. For the worker, this is, again, intended to be very simple. There will be roughly 3 accounts, and only 3 accounts, and there will be the same 3 accounts for all automatic IRAs, regardless if it's the First National Bank of somewhere county or the largest IRA provider in the country. The startup account will be something like a United States Savings Bond account, the R bond, basically. Or alternately, if the provider chooses instead, it could be something like a bank passbook savings account or a stable value fund, something that has an exceedingly low cost and enables the individual to put together a certain amount of savings, and the exact amount is a little unclear now. Let's just say $5,000 for the moment. At $5,000, the individual's account would be automatically rolled over into something like a lifespan, lifestyle, or target date fund. And we recognize that there is work in Washington right now to try to tighten the definition of those and to make some changes. And we anticipate that those will be incorporated into the design of this program. And the third account, which the individual could only go into if they ask to, would have slightly higher stocks as a proportion of the account. So if the target date fund had, say, 30% equities at a point, this one might have 35 or 40%. The individual has the ability at any time to say no. The individual can save more or less than the 3% of income that's set up as the start, and frankly one of the things that we strongly encourage is that there be an automatic escalation feature so that the proportion of income that goes into these accounts gradually increases as the worker's take-home pay increases. The worker could say, no, I want to keep my money in the R bond account permanently. The worker could decide to stop participating whatsoever at various and sundry points. But the aim is to make it as simple and easy to understand as possible. We have also done a fair amount of research, both in terms of focus groups and polling data. We found that among the workers who would be eligible for an automatic IRA, that the vast majority, in the order of 80 to 85%, wanted the opportunity to do this. They supported the automatic enrollment system. They felt that they would be saving earlier than they would have otherwise. And an interesting thing for small business people is that they felt that even if every single company in the United States offered the automatic IRA, they would feel better and more loyal to their employer if their employer started the automatic IRA. Now, for employers, we found that after the system had been explained, that the support for the automatic IRA was very strong. And interestingly, it was strongest among the smaller employers. Now, this is not a perfect system. This is not going to bring in every single worker as much as we would really like to do this. But we feel that this is doable. This is something that would make a major change, a major improvement in the ability of workers, and particularly low and moderate income workers, to increase their assets and their savings. Because it's an IRA, if they run into an emergency, it is possible to withdraw the funds. There's usually a tax benefit or a penalty if it's with money is withdrawn prior to age 59 and a half, but it can be done if necessary. And a key factor here is that by using automatic enrollment, we are increasing the savings of the 4 groups that most are undersaved. These are lower income workers, women, younger workers, and members of minority groups. And studies with automatic enrollment, admittedly those are 401ks, but we believe that this will be comparable, show that these groups, which move from participation rates in the high teens to the mid-20s in percentage basis, moves up to the national average into the high 70s and even into the high 80s. So we believe that this has the opportunity to assist the people that we most want to help. And last but not least, and I'll stop there because I would love to get questions and comments. We are currently drafting, so if you have ideas, we would be very grateful for your input in this. But last but not least, in this case, we found that the workers who participate in this type of a program are much more likely to be able to participate or be active in a number of other types of programs. We have found that there is a very positive social benefit to people who save, regardless of whether it's for retirement or for other purposes. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'm sure I've left out a wide variety of things. There is a tax credit for small businesses, but hopefully if you've got questions or comments, and please don't stop at negative comments. We're more than happy to get sound criticism as well. I'd love to hear them.
Thank you so much, David. We do have at least one question for you and a question for all the panelists. David, most of the proposals we are discussing are variations of the defined contribution plan. Why not advocate for a national pension plan? We already have somewhat of a framework through Social Security, which has other benefits such as survival and spousal benefits. Has anyone proposed this model?
There actually have been several of these models that have been proposed. There's a group called Retirement USA, which is currently trying to develop various aspects of that. Frankly, at some point or another, it's possible that there may be some sort of an additional national program. I believe, however, that debate and that discussion is going to take quite some time. The automatic IRA and some of the other proposals that Olivia, Ted, Gary proposed, and Madge, I'm sorry, are things that we could implement far faster. And while they're not perfect, they would be incremental steps towards that type of a goal.
This is Dean. Dean Baker, if I could jump in very quickly. I very much agree with what David said, but I'd also point out that you could see one as a stepping stone to the other. In other words, if you put in place some sort of universal voluntary account type system like this, then in principle there's no reason you could not have as one of the options a defined benefit that in effect what would happen is you'd accept this somewhat lower average return in exchange for a guaranteed return. So if I put aside $1,000 a year or some amount like that, then I may be guaranteed a return of 3%. So that means when I turn age 65 or whatever age that might be, then I know that I'll be getting $100 a month. I haven't done the arithmetic on that, but you could envision a system like that being offered as an option once you had this sort of voluntary system in place.
Thank you. David, How would this federal legislation and the state legislation fit together?
Well, they are not mutually exclusive by any step of the imagination. If the various state plans were approved and companies chose to go that route, say, instead of the federal automatic IRA, they would have met the requirement anyway. It really doesn't matter if an employer chooses the California, Washington, West Virginia, or Virginia plans, because they offer some sort of retirement savings plan, they are by that point exempt from the automatic IRA.
Thank you. And also, David, one last question for you. Would these accounts be new savings or simply moving savings from an existing account?
We anticipate that the vast majority of these would be new savings, at least initially. A very large number of the people who don't save now are younger workers who don't have much else in the way of savings. Now, one of the things we see as time goes on is that we will see workers who have had an automatic IRA early in their career and went to work for a company with a 401k and had the automatic IRA balances rolled into the 401k, may then go back to work for an automatic IRA employer, in which case the 401k balances would be rolled into the automatic IRA. So at some point or another, everything's going to get mixed together, especially as the workers age. But at least initially, we anticipate the vast majority of this would be new savings.
Great. This question is for any of the panelists. And the question is as follows. People of color are 2 times more likely to be asset poor than whites. What suggestion do you have to close this gap for this population and for elders and elders of color as well?
Well, this is Dean. You know, there's a few different things here. One, we're proposing mechanisms that will make it easier for for those who don't have accounts to save, and obviously disproportionately those are people of color. Other parts of the story, I just want to say no one could envision that this is going to be a cure-all. So, you know, we could make it easier for African Americans, people of color to save, but if you don't have the income, that's still going to be a big problem. So no one should envision that somehow by, making a saving vehicle open to people who don't currently have it, that people who are otherwise poor are going to become wealthy. So, the answer to that has to be a much longer set of solutions that have to do with improving their wages, improving their education. I mean, there's not going to be a single answer. We're not going to make poor people wealthy. There's no way you're going to be able to do that. So this is one part of that picture that can make people who do have jobs, regular jobs, give them an opportunity to save so they'll have more in retirement, but we can't make people otherwise poor wealthy through this.
And this is David. There actually was a study that Ariel did earlier this year, I believe, with support from Rockefeller and several other founders, which looked particularly at the problems that people of color have in savings and behavioral aspects and the like. And there are very definitely a need to target these various efforts to specifically meet the special characteristics of these populations. So this is something that we've looked at with the automatic IRA, and frankly, we anticipate having to go back in the future and better target some of these efforts as time goes on.
This is Madge in Virginia. I just wanted to say that we were really pleased to have the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the African American Chamber of Commerce, and the Asian Chamber of Commerce to join with our Chamber of Commerce and other business groups to be a part of our stakeholder group. And they have just been such great partners in helping us get information out about our VERA program in Virginia.
Great. This question is also directed towards all of the panelists. What about mass retirement savings accounts as recommended by the Aspen Institute?
I think we're going to need a reminder of precisely the details there. Aspen has a number of proposals which are very well considered and well thought out, but I have to be honest, I sometimes have trouble separating them from others.
I'm not sure, but I think what the questioner is asking is retirement savings that are more matched, so about more employer-sponsored contributions to the savings plans.
Oh, well, that's actually a goal as we move up. Let's be perfectly honest. One of the reasons that we use an IRA, other than the fact that it is very easily portable, is that it's politically possible at this point in time. What we would urge as time goes forward is that either some of the larger efforts, such as other people have mentioned, may take place, or at the very least, we try to encourage employers to move up to an IRA simple or a 401k or some other method so that employer-matched contributions can occur. Because, as we all know, the employer match is a very key element in getting people to save.
Our questioner just followed up. They're specifically referring to matches similar to individual development account programs that were provided by the government. Is that something that's currently being contemplated?
I believe what's being discussed in the Obama administration, and it's part of their budget, is a change to the Savers Credit. And under this change to the Savers Credit, families with incomes of under $65,000 a year would be eligible to have their savings matched, I believe 50 cents match for each dollar, up to a maximum of $1,000 a year in savings or $500 match, and that match would go directly into the account. That is a proposal that the Obama administration is pushing. I believe legislation has already been introduced on that, and it's just going to be a matter of whether or not we can get something like that passed.
Great, thank you. This concludes our question and answer portion of the webinar. Before we conclude our webinar, I would like to mention a few helpful and relevant websites, articles, and resources for any attendees that would like to learn more information about asset poverty and retirement security. You will be emailed a link to the resources page after the webinar is completed. In addition to copies of all of today's presentations, there are also a number of articles on our resources page, including an article entitled Universal Voluntary Retirement Accounts, A Financially Secure Future, which appears in the November-December issue of the Shriver Center's Law Review, the Clearinghouse Review. Please visit the resources page for additional articles. You can also visit all of our panelists' websites. If you want to see how your state ranks on asset building areas, visit CFED's 2009-2010 Asset and Opportunity Scorecard website. Finally, if you are interested in partnering with an asset coalition in your state to work on the issue of retirement security or other asset policies, you may go to the AssetCoalitionToolkit.org website and find the asset coalitions in your state. Thank you all to the presenters who are diligently working on the issue of retirement savings and gave of their time today to share this information. Thank you to all the attendees for your participation in the webinar. Please take a minute to fill out our survey if you would like more information about asset building and universal voluntary retirement accounts, or if you would like to subscribe to ACTS or the Clearinghouse Review, you can do so through this survey. Again, if you have any questions or you would like further information, please visit our resources page or contact myself, Kate Flannery, at kateflannery@povertylaw.org. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.